Let's make some cheese. I'm going to start this process with the polyline tool, and I'm going to pick a profile for a plate to place the cheese upon. So I'm just eyeballing the size of my plate here, take myself out of ortho mode as I need to. Now if you're actually serving cheese, it might not be best to put it on this kind of a plate, but for purposes of demonstration here, this works really well. So I'm going to create here, as it were, the profile for a plate. And let's go ahead, I'm going to back out of that one a little bit, and I'm going to use my tracking and polar here to make certain that my plate has the same values for the bottom section on the plate. Let's raise that up a little bit. I'll just grab the polyline and stretch that up to narrow that a little bit. So this surface that you see here is going to become the actual plate shape. And since this is a polyline, I can of course grab these edges and vertices and change the location of that. So I'm pretty happy with that. That's a cross-sectional shape for the plate. Now I'm going to go ahead and revolve this. Since this is a closed polyline, I'll get a 3D solid in this operation. If this were not a closed polyline, the result object would be a surface, and you would have to then work with the surfacing tools to get this thing to behave in combination with other surfaces and things. But in this case, we're going to make a 3D solid out of it. So I'm going to drop down the solids modeling tool and select the revolve tool. And I had my object previously grip selected, so now it's asking me for the axis for this. And AutoCAD uses the right-hand rule when it comes to rotational direction. So if I pick this point here and then this point higher up on my screen, that means my thumb is pointing upwards, and using my right-hand rule, I can now determine how far I want to rotate that section. In this case, I want to do a full 360 degrees, so I'll just accept the default value and press enter. Now you can see I have a plate here on my screen, only unfortunately it's facing upwards in the X, Y, and Z direction, or specifically it needs to be rotated 90 degrees along the X-axis. That's pretty easy to do, but it's even easier to do if I'm in a different view so I can see what's happening here, and if I have an idea about which way is X, Y, and Z. So to change to my view, I'm going to utilize the view cube here and maybe go to the south west isometric view. Now I can see there's my original profile for this object here, and now if I grip select these and change my visual style to something other than 2D wireframe, maybe like X-ray, you'll notice that now if I grip select these, I have a move transformation gizmo here, and I can actually select this and move the object up and down in space, or if I pause on one of these constraint mechanisms here, I can constrain it to a planar movement. But in this case, I don't want the move gizmo, I want the rotate gizmo. So I'm going to right mouse click and choose the rotate gizmo instead. Now you can see I have these rings that correspond to the different axial rotation directions. In this case, I want to rotate this thing upwards 90 degrees, so I'll select this particular constraint that's going to constrain the rotation along the x-axis. And if you notice, there's a little highlighted circular pie shape in the middle of that, if you will, that's showing me how far it's being rotated. I can use my polar constraints here to just simply rotate 90 degrees, or if I simply want to type in 90 degrees, you can see I've rotated the plate now so that it's 90 degrees and flat in my XY plane, if you will, and Z is pointing upward. Now I can go ahead and press escape, and you can see there is my plate surface to place my cheese upon. In this case, I'm just going to go ahead and start with a cylinder. It's easy enough to do. And I can turn on dynamic coordinate system here. And now you'll notice if I move my mouse on top of this surface, it's actually finding the horizontal flat surface on the top of the plate to draw on. So if I left click here, I can simply pick the radius for my cylinder, move upwards in space, and left click. You can also type in values for any of those as well, should you wish to do so. It's another totally viable option. So now I've got my cylinder here, and I want to turn this thing into Swiss cheese. So what I'm going to do is to move to the sphere tool, and just out in space here, I'm just going to create a series of small spheres. It doesn't matter how big they are, they can even overlap. Ideally, they should be different sizes to mimic the gas air bubbles that might be occurring inside of some cheese. And just to speed things up here a little bit, I'm just going to issue a copy command, and I'll just copy all of these around a few times. And I'm just comparing this to the size of my cheese that I have back on my plate there. And now I can go ahead and arbitrarily just pick a few of these. And let's see, we'll grab those and I'll switch to my move gizmo now and grab this plane, move some of these up in space. And here's where you might want to turn your O snaps off because it can constrain your actual pick choices. So I'm going to grab a few more of these, drag these downward in the Z direction, orbit around, see how my air bubbles are looking, grab a few more because they're all in the same plane. That doesn't look very realistic. Move these upwards in space. And in fact, you could even use a copy command to move those up as well if you wanted to. Yeah, let's move those two up here. How's that looking? It's looking better. Still a lot of them are in this plane here that I might want to still play with some more. And move upwards or downwards in space, but you get the idea. So there's a bunch of bubbles that are in a different area now. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take those. Let me make a few more here. We'll make this cheese very, very airy. And we'll just copy these out this way. So now hopefully we have a greater variety there. Yeah, that's better. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take those and I'm going to union them all together so that they behave as one group of objects. And whoops, let's move these ones here from the center of one of these spheres here. Yeah, that doesn't want to do that, so let's just grab them all. Let's go to my plan view here, and let's move all of these upwards back in space. Upwards, how do those look? Let's move these over to about here, and let's move all of these upwards in space to about here maybe. There we go, that's better. Move all of these over to maybe here. And grab all of these and let's move them upward in the Z direction. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all of these and I'm going to union them. So the union operation command is right up here. You can select all of these and union them together. Now you can see that they behave as one complete 3D solid, even though they're disconnected by space. Should you need to, you can disconnect them by selecting the separate tool right here on the solid editing panel. And if I do that, you'll notice that the ones that are disconnected by space now are separate. Notice that the ones that were actually connected to other ones, though, are still connected as a 3D solid. You can't separate those with the separate command. You'd have to use some other technique to get those to disconnect from each other. So at any rate, let me reunion those and put those all back together again. So now they're all reunion. And what I'm going to do is switch to my plan view, and there's lots of ways you can do this. Whoops, let's go to the top view here. And just using the move command, I'll just drag these over to the center of my cheese. And you can see now that those bubbles are all occupying the center of the cheese area here. Let's move them upwards in space a little bit. And so that they're sticking out of the top of the cheese as well. Yeah, that looks pretty good. You'll notice some of them are floating around the plate. That's okay. I was very haphazard when I created the location for those. So before I actually create this, I want to actually fillet this cheese to give it a little bit softer edge on it. I don't want it to have quite such a sharp corner on the top of the cylinder. So if we go into the solid toolbar here, you'll notice there's a fillet tool here. This is actually very similar to the standard 2D fillet operation. However, if you use it from here as opposed to typing it at the command line, you'll get more control in this and you'll be able to change the fillet setting later. So if I select the fillet there, you can see it automatically gives me one that I can preview. You can then grab this little triangle here and change the size of your fillet very easily and intuitively just by looking at the object as you're filleting it. That's something you don't get when you actually use the 2D fillet command. And likewise, I'll fillet the bottom edge as well. So let's go back here. Let's grab that again. Fillet. And drag this out to a small area here. And I'm okay with that. And then let's fillet the bottom edge as well. And I'm okay with that one too. So now you can see I have a nice eased edge on the edges of my cheese. So now I'm going to subtract the bubbles from here. So if I go to the subtract command and pick my cylinder of cheese, I can press enter, select the bubbles, and you will now notice that my cheese now has been made into a series of small, or has subtracted out from it the actual cylinders or spheres. So if we switch to something where you can see that a little more easily, you can see that in fact it is now Swiss cheese. Of course, you might want to slice your cheese, so we can use the actual slice command here and select our cylinder, and then we can pick 2 points in space, and it'll actually use that as a vertical cutting plane. And we'll say let's keep both sides for that slice operation. So now you can see if I move this slice of the cheese out of the way, you can see that in fact we have cut through the Swiss cheese and it is actually full of bubbles now. And we could actually use the slice command by using 3 operations or 3 pick points. So if we pick this edge or this part of it to slice, we can use the 3-point option that you see down here simply by pressing enter. And in this case, you can actually pick 3 geometry points, and I'll say pick the end point of the cheese here. I'll pick the end point of the bubble here, and I'll pick the end point of this bubble over here, right here maybe. And in this case, I'll say let's just keep the bottom side. So I will snap to the end point of the cheese bubble over here maybe, and it should just keep that side. So now you can see I've sliced off a portion of the cheese in that direction as well. At any rate, that's how you can model Swiss cheese inside of AutoCAD. Pretty easy and simple to do, and delicious too.